Have you ever loved someone so much that watching them struggle felt like losing your breath with every step? They couldn't take Ethan Cole, a billionaire who could buy almost anything, couldn't buy the one thing he needed most: hope. His twin children hadn't walked since birth, and after years of silence from doctors, his mansion felt more like a tomb of broken dreams. Then, one day, he saw something he couldn't explain: their nanny, Naomi, doing something unbelievable, something that defied logic and brought life back into legs once declared lifeless. But when miracles happen outside science, people start asking questions. Was it faith, or deception love, or illusion? If you were Ethan, would you risk everything: your empire, your name, your power, for the chance to believe again? Because sometimes the real miracle isn't about walking. It's about finding the courage to stand up for what your heart knows is true. Stay with us, because what happened next will change the way you see love, faith, and the human spirit forever. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is one story you won't forget. Mornings in suburban Seattle are always covered with a thin layer of mist, like a wet velvet curtain. In a white mansion on Lake Sammamish, Ethan Cole, the Black CEO of America's leading biomedical technology corporation, sat motionless before a cup of cold coffee. The light reflecting off the lake cast a pale blue hue on his face, making his already deep eyes appear even deeper. In a house so large that even footsteps echoed as if coming from somewhere else. There were only two sounds he really cared about: the giggles of his twins Caleb and Maya. 6. But that laughter had been silent for more than 2 years. Neither child could walk, not because of an accident, not because of a genetic disease, but because of a mysterious psychological trauma. Top doctors from Stanford and Johns Hopkins had visited them and concluded that their motor nerves were not damaged. They just don't want to walk, one specialist said quietly, as if afraid of his own words. Ethan clenched his coffee cup. He had thought money could solve everything, from scientific research to emotional healing. But looking at his two children sitting silently on the couch, staring blankly out the window, he understood that there were some things power could not buy. "I'll find a way." "Kids," he whispered. His voice was hoarse from sleepless nights. 3 months ago, the housekeeper suggested he hire a new nanny. After dozens of applications, there was only one woman who did not have a high degree, was not introduced by a brokerage company, and did not come from a prestigious school. Her name was Naomi Rivera, a black woman from New Mexico who had volunteered with autistic children. Her resume was brief, but during the interview, the look in her eyes stopped Ethan. Not the fearful look of someone who came to work for a billionaire, but the look of someone who had known loss. "You don't need someone who knows how to talk to the media," Naomi said softly. "You need someone who knows when to shut up." Ethan looked at her, his lips pressed together. He didn't know why he agreed. Maybe it was the lowness of her voice. Maybe it was the slight shaking in her hands as she buttoned her blouse, as if she were harboring a secret she didn't want to reveal. In the early days, Naomi did nothing special. She didn't try to teach the two children to walk, didn't give dry therapy lectures. She just sat on the floor, next to Caleb and Maya, building small buildings with wooden blocks. She talked to them as if they understood, as if they were just waiting for someone to speak their language. "You know, Maya," Naomi said softly once, "in New Mexico, there is a bird so small they call it the spirit of the wind. It only flies when the wind is calm. Maybe you're waiting for the wind to calm down so you can walk." Ethan heard that from behind the door. He didn't know why, but his heart fluttered. A woman he only considered a babysitter was saying things to his son that he, a father, a billionaire, had never thought possible. That night, after the family had gone to bed, Ethan went into his study. On the desk were piles of therapy files, MRI scans, and psychological analyses. Amid the thick pile of papers, he stopped at a photograph his wife, Clara, the woman who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. She left when the 2 children were 3, and from that day on, they never walked again. Ethan never told Naomi about it. He was afraid of pity, afraid of cheap sympathy. But there was something in Naomi's eyes, a quiet light he couldn't explain, that made him believe she understood the pain of loss without words. One morning, Ethan walked down to the living room. He stopped. Naomi was in the middle of the floor, singing softly a song in Old Spanish, slow and warm. Caleb and Maya sat across from her, touching old rosary beads, listening. Then the unbelievable happened. Maya, who had always been afraid of touching the ground, slowly placed her feet on the carpet. Naomi said nothing, just smiled, her eyes sparkling. Ethan held his breath. She gently lifted her foot and took the first step. Ethan felt time stop. The room was so quiet he could hear his own breathing, but Naomi didn't turn around. She kept singing, kept the moment about Maya and no one else. When the song ended, Maya raised her head, looking towards the window, where the first rays of sunlight were shining through, and she whispered, her voice trembling, "Daddy, I hear the wind." Ethan nearly fell to his knees. He didn't believe in miracles, but at that moment, in a house full of technology, in a world of reason and data, miracles were made possible by his child's tiny steps. That evening, as Naomi was about to leave, Ethan called out to her. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice shaking. Naomi just looked at him and said softly, "It wasn't me." She walked away. When she felt seen, really, the words echoed in Ethan's head all night. He thought of his wife, of the lonely years, of his 2 children, like windswept birds. He never stopped to look at them, he only tried to fix them. But Naomi, she did the opposite. Ethan looked out at the lake. The mist was still thick, but the moonlight reflected it brighter than ever. He wondered who was this woman, and how, in just a few weeks, had she done what dozens of doctors, therapists, and himself, his all-powerful father, could not. Little did he know, what Naomi had accomplished today was only the beginning, and what she was about to reveal would not only change the 2 children, but also change his inner world. A light rain pattered against the windows of the Lake Sammamish villa. The sound of rain often kept Ethan awake, as it brought back memories of the day his wife left him on a similarly rainy night. He tossed and turned, forcing himself to close his eyes, but the image of Maya taking that first step was still clear in his mind. That small, seemingly simple step had broken the wall of silence that had lasted for 2 years. Around midnight, Ethan heard a slight noise downstairs. He thought it was just the wind. But then there was soft singing. Naomi's voice, the melody, was soft and slow, like a breeze across a lake. He walked quietly downstairs. Naomi sat in the dimly lit living room with her 2 children. She had no idea Ethan was watching. Caleb, a less expressive boy than Maya, held her hand. An old guitar leaned against the chair beside her. Naomi strummed a few strings, singing a song without words. The melody was both sad and peaceful, as if it had been woven from the cracks in the singer's heart. "You know, Caleb," she said softly, "when you lose someone, sometimes your heart forgets how to walk like your feet. But then, if you trust enough, it will find its way back." The boy looked up at her, his brown eyes shining in the yellow light. Ethan held his breath. His son, who hadn't spoken a word in 2 years, made a small sound. Naomi paused, then smiled. "Yes, I do. I believe that you deserve to be happy, to take a step forward, even if it's just one step." Ethan could hardly believe his ears. He stepped back, his heart racing. There was something about this woman, an energy that opened up children, that warmed the cold house without the need for firelight. The next morning, he asked Naomi over breakfast, "Where did you study?" "I looked in your records and found nothing about therapy skills." Naomi just smiled, not avoiding it, but not answering directly either. "I didn't learn it in school. Mr. Cole, I learned it from loss." Ethan was about to ask more when Caleb suddenly tugged on Naomi's hand, drawing a small circle with his pencil. "Mom sings. Like that." He mumbled. The air was silent. Ethan looked at Naomi, who gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe your mother is still out there somewhere, watching your every move." Her voice was so warm and genuine that Ethan felt his throat tighten. That evening, when Naomi left, he stood by the window watching her, under the moonlight. Her small figure, wearing an old sweater, walked slowly through the drizzling rain. There was something strangely familiar about her gait, as if he had seen it somewhere before. The next day, Ethan arrived at the office early. The board meeting was tense. One of the senior executives, a white man with silver hair, said in a heavy voice, "We can't just spend money on random emotional therapy projects. This is a company, not a charity." Ethan looked at him, his eyes cold. "You have never seen a child lose its laughter. When you do, you will understand the value of a peaceful soul is greater than profit." The conference room was dead silent. It was the first time since his wife died that he had spoken with such emotion. He realized that Naomi had not only changed the children, but had also brought him back to life. That night, when he got home, he found Naomi packing up her toys. She said she was taking 2 days off to go back to her hometown. Ethan was slightly worried, but just nodded. "If you need a car or a driver, just let me know." Naomi shook her head. "No need. I'm just visiting an old friend." That night, Maya cried in her sleep, calling out for her mother. Ethan ran to the room and found Naomi gone. Instinct made him hurry out onto the porch, where the wind blew cold. In the moonlight, he saw something that stopped him. Caleb standing, alone. The little boy was taking his first steps, tears rolling down his cheeks. "Dad, I saw Mommy in my dream. She said, 'Don't be afraid.'" Ethan held his daughter close, unable to speak. He felt as if Clara's spirit was still lingering around, and Naomi was somehow a bridge between the two worlds. The day Naomi returned, she was carrying a small wooden box. She set it down in front of Ethan. "In here," she said, "is something that will help you understand why your children couldn't walk, and why they can now." Ethan opened the box. Inside was an old photograph taken in New Mexico of a younger Naomi, standing next to a woman holding 2 babies. It was Clara. Ethan was stunned. All sound in the room seemed to have disappeared. "You?" "No, my wife Naomi looked at him. her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't just know. I owe her my life." The air felt thick. Questions, doubts, memories burst into his mind. What had seemed random suddenly became intentional, and he knew, tonight, he would hear a story that would change everything he thought about this life. Outside, the rain fell again, as light as a breath. Inside Ethan, a storm was just beginning to form. The room was so quiet, Ethan could hear the clock on the wall. He sat there, facing Naomi, the old photograph between them like a knife stabbing into the past. Every word seemed to shatter. He looked at her for a long moment, trying to calm himself. "Explain. Naomi, why do you have this photograph? And why is my wife in it?" Naomi took a deep breath, her hands clasped together. "I met Clara 7 years ago in Albuquerque. I was a volunteer nurse at the orphanage. She came there every weekend, not as a charity worker like many, but as someone searching for a lost part of herself. That day, she helped me take a child with a congenital disease to the emergency room. I'll never forget the way she held his hand, trembling and praying." Naomi paused, her voice dropping. "That child was my brother." Ethan's eyes widened. "Your brother?" She nodded. "He didn't make it. Clara stayed with me all night in the waiting room. We didn't say much, just sat together, but her eyes were full of compassion. Before she left, she said something that I still remember. Someday, if you can bring about what the doctors say is impossible, just believe in it." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice low. "And you believed that enough to come here." Naomi chuckled. "It wasn't just because of faith. When I saw the article about her death, my heart sank. I was grateful to Clara, but I never had the chance to repay her. When I heard you were looking for someone to look after the 2 children, I thought, maybe this is the only way I can do the right thing." Ethan looked deep into her eyes. There was no deception, only sincere light mixed with sadness. He was silent for a long time and then said softly, "You know, since Clara died, I stopped trusting anyone. But now, seeing what you do for the children, I'm starting to get scared. Scared that if I trust, I'll lose it again." Naomi replied softly, "Sometimes. Fear of loss is the reason why we can never find the most precious thing again." In that moment, Ethan realized she had the same strength Clara had, unconditional trust. He suddenly understood why Caleb and Maya had opened up to Naomi so much. In the evenings, while Naomi taught the children to draw, Ethan watched quietly. Caleb drew a sky with 2 small wings. Maya drew a woman standing in the light, smiling softly. "Who is she?" Ethan asked. "It's Naomi. She's magical," Maya replied, looking up with a mischievous smile. "Don't you see, when she comes, I feel lighter?" Ethan laughed, but his heart clenched. He knew his daughter was right. It was not just the children who felt lighter, but he too. A week later, Naomi started a new practice, music therapy. She turned the living room into a small stage. Caleb and Maya wore ribbons on their wrists and danced to slow music. Each time one of them fell, Naomi didn't rush to catch them, just smiled and said, "It's okay. Falling is part of learning." Ethan watched from a distance. Before, he would have panicked if he saw his son fall, but now he kept quiet, letting his mind learn to relax. That evening, Naomi called him out onto the porch. "Have you ever thought that sometimes what separates us is not the body, but the memory?" Ethan looked out at the lake, the night wind chilly. "My memories are full of loss. I'm not sure I can forget." Naomi shook her head slightly. No need to forget. Just look at it with different eyes. Ethan smiled faintly. Different eyes. You make it sound philosophical. No, it's the medicine of the soul, she replied, her voice light as air. You're a man of color, and you've overcome so much prejudice to succeed, but you've probably never allowed yourself to be vulnerable. The two children are learning that from you. Ethan turned to look at her, suddenly feeling like those words were stripping away the armor he had been wearing for so long. He was silent for a long time, then only said one sentence. Thank you. That night, he dreamed of Clara. She stood by the lake, smiling, nodding slightly as if in blessing. When he woke, he heard the laughter of two children echoing throughout the house. A sound he thought he had forgotten. But when he got downstairs, he found that Naomi was not there. The front door was wide open, and on the table, a small note had been left. Don't look for me. I have something to face. Ethan's heart sank. He called her quickly, but her number was unreachable. Part of him wanted to believe she was just leaving, but deep down, he had a feeling it was something more serious. From upstairs, Caleb called out, Dad, where did Naomi go? I haven't shown her how I can run yet. Ethan was silent. He looked up at the dark sky outside the window. The storm was coming, and he understood not just the storm of the weather, but the storm of their lives. The rain came faster than expected. The wind whipped against the glass windows, making the lakeside house feel colder than ever. Ethan sat in his office, his phone still calling Naomi. Each time the line rang and then stopped. His heart felt a little more squeezed. Hundreds of questions filled his head, but none of them had answers. Where had Naomi gone? Why had she left without an explanation? Caleb and Maya stood by the stairs, staring at their father in bewilderment. Dad, is Naomi mad at you? Maya asked, her voice small. Ethan leaned down and put his hand on his shoulder. No, honey, maybe she just needs time. But he didn't believe it himself. The house was quiet all afternoon. It wasn't until dusk that Ethan remembered a small detail, the wooden box Naomi had left behind. Beneath the lining was a folded piece of paper, written in soft handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm probably walking the same path Clara walked. There's something you need to know about the children's illness. Ethan read the words over and over again, then drove quickly through the rain to the old clinic where Naomi used to work. The old nurse at the reception desk recognized her name immediately. Naomi. She came back this morning. She didn't look well and said she wanted to see Dr. Harold, who treated the boy that year. What did she say? Ethan pressed. The nurse shook her head. I just said there were things I never dared to say. Ethan felt his blood run cold. He got into his car, turned on the GPS, and headed downtown. The rain was getting heavier, the flooded streets mirroring his turmoil. When he arrived, the clinic lights were off. He ran in, knocked on the door, and called out. After a few minutes, an older man opened the door. Dr. Harold. He looked at Ethan in surprise. Who are you? I'm Ethan Cole. I'm looking for Naomi Rivera. She came to see you today. Harold sighed, motioning for him to enter. She left not long ago, but perhaps you should know Naomi was my patient, not an employee. Ethan froze. Patient, yes. After her brother died, Naomi was diagnosed with severe mental retardation. She was unable to walk for almost 2 years. We tried many things, but what brought her back wasn't medicine. It was when she helped a little girl learn to walk again through music. Ethan was silent. Harold's every word seared into his mind. Naomi not only understood the children's pain, she had lived it. She knew what it felt like to lose the ability to walk. "Do you know where she went?" Ethan asked urgently. Harold shook his head. "She only said one thing. If miracles really exist, I have to face where they began." Ethan understood immediately. New Mexico. The next morning, Ethan booked the earliest flight. As the plane left Seattle, he looked out the window. The overcast sky was slowly clearing. For the first time in years, he felt something other than faith. When he arrived in Albuquerque, the memory of that old photo flashed through his mind: the wooden porch, the grassy hills, and the silhouettes of two smiling women. He drove almost all night to the small house on the edge of town. The white wooden door was ajar, and Naomi was standing there. She looked at him, surprised and tired. "You shouldn't have come." "Why?" Ethan asked. His voice choked. "Are you just going to leave like that? After all you've done for the kids?" Naomi turned away, hiding her eyes. "I can't go on. Ethan, you don't understand. There's something you don't know about the children's illness." Ethan stepped closer. "Then tell me. I've lost too much by keeping quiet." She took a shaky breath, then spoke slowly. "Their illness is not just congenital. When Clara was pregnant, she fell hard, resulting in fetal nerve damage. The doctor said that some recovery was possible, with the right stimulation in the early stages. Clara came to me, wanting to try the music therapy I had used on myself, but she died before she could start." Ethan was stunned. "She never told me." Naomi smiled sadly, "Because she knew you wouldn't believe it. You always chose reason, and she believed in things that defied logic." A strong wind blew, shaking the eaves. Ethan looked at the woman before him, a woman who had been broken at heart, but still had the courage to heal others. He understood Naomi had not come to replace Clara. She had come to complete what Clara had not been able to. "If Clara believes it, I will too," he said softly. "For her and for you." Naomi looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan, you don't know. I promised Clara I would protect the children at all costs, but I was afraid you would think I was doing it out of pity." "No," he replied, his voice steady. "I think you did it out of love." Outside, the rain stopped, the sky brightened, the first rays of sunlight shining on the grassy hill. In that moment, Ethan saw Naomi's legs tremble, but she remained steady as if she, too, were overcoming her fear. In the distance, church bells toll. A new chapter is opening not just for Naomi, but for him and the two children at home who await the next miracle. The next morning, Ethan and Naomi returned to Seattle. The flight was silent, except for the wind whistling through the windows and the pale light of dawn reflecting on their faces. Ethan glanced over occasionally, wanting to say something but holding back. He noticed Naomi's hands were shaking slightly, not from the cold, but from fear. She had returned to the place that had hurt her to face what was unfinished. When the car stopped in front of the lake house, the two children were waiting. Caleb was holding his small wooden guitar. Maya was clutching her teddy bear. When Naomi got out, they both ran to her and hugged her. Ethan stood behind her, watching the scene a warmth he had forgotten he had ever craved. Naomi bent down and said softly, "I'm sorry for leaving without saying goodbye, but I promise I won't leave again this time." Maya looked up, her eyes clear. You promise? Right. Naomi smiled. I promise. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house seemed different. Naomi didn't start over. She continued her journey from where she had left off, but this time, Ethan joined in. He sat next to them as they practiced, learning to listen to the awkward yet meaningful sounds. He let himself be carried away by the rhythm of Caleb's tiny fingers on the keys, and realized that miracles weren't something that happened suddenly, but something that was nurtured day by day. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the porch in golden light, Naomi and the two children sang together. Her voice was deep and soft, like the breath of spring. Ethan stood in the corner of the room, saying nothing, just watching. He saw a different light in Naomi's eyes, no longer fear, but faith. Caleb stood suddenly, holding onto the table, slowly lifting his legs. Naomi held her breath, her eyes following every small movement. Then, like a miracle repeating itself, the boy took the first step. Maya cried out. Ethan was stunned. The boy took another step, and another until he stumbled into his father's arms. Ethan hugged him. His voice choked. You did it, son. Naomi turned away, tears falling silently. She knew that moment was the culmination of all her hard work. But what moved her most was Ethan's look, no longer the cold father who believed only in results. Now he believed in the journey. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Ethan walked into the kitchen, where Naomi was washing teacups. I owe you an apology, he said softly. I used to treat you like an outsider, to doubt you, to fear that you would make me believe something that wasn't true. But now I realize it was that fear that blinded me. Naomi didn't turn around, just whispered, You don't owe me anything. Just keep believing for the kids, for yourself. He stepped closer. Hesitantly, Naomi, why are you doing all this? It's not just because of the promise to Clara, right? She smiled slightly, her eyes glinting in the kitchen light. Because I saw myself in their eyes. I used to lie there, afraid, not believing I could get up, until someone told me that miracles only happen when you dare to dream again. Ethan looked at her for a long time. He realized that sometimes people come to us not to replace someone, but to complete the missing part in us. He nodded slightly, his voice low. If Clara were here, she would know she chose the right person. Naomi smiled, light as the wind. I'm not here to replace her, Ethan. I just want to help you remember what it feels like to believe in good things. In that moment, in the warm kitchen light, no one said another word. There was only the sound of the rain falling on the porch and the mingling of breaths. Ethan knew his life had taken a different turn, where love began not with passion, but with healing. The next morning, Naomi took the two children to the lake. She spread a small blanket and placed the wooden guitar between them. Caleb sat on the grass, Maya beside him, and they both sang along to the guitar. Ethan stood far away, watching his child smile, watching Naomi's reflection on the water, and suddenly realized perhaps this was what Clara had always wanted, a home filled with laughter, a hope reborn from loss. That afternoon, when everyone had returned, Ethan looked up at the old photo hanging on the wall, him, Clara, and the two babies. Still red, beneath it, he now placed another him, Naomi, Caleb, and Maya, this morning, the sunlight streaming through her hair like a thread of gold. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, He wasn't afraid. That night, as Naomi walked out of the children's room, Ethan whispered, "Thank you for bringing back the magic." Naomi only smiled in response. But deep down, she knew the magic never really went away. It just needed someone brave enough to believe. One chilly autumn morning, Ethan was reviewing a new plan in his study when Maya knocked softly on the door. She was carrying an old photo frame, dust covering the wooden frame. "Daddy, this is in Mom's closet. I've never seen it," she said hesitantly. Ethan took it, wiped the dust away, and his heart stopped. In the photo, beside Clara, was a young woman with a gentle smile. Naomi. He stared, not believing his eyes. The photo had been taken in the hospital years ago, when the two children were newborns. His heart pounded. He called Naomi to the library, placed the frame on the table. "Explain to me, why are you in this picture?" His voice was low, mixed with confusion and doubt. Naomi froze, her eyes growing wet. She looked at the picture for a long time before answering. "I thought I would never have to say this." She took a deep breath and gently placed her hand on the photo. "I was the nurse who assisted in the C-section when Clara gave birth to the twins. She lost a lot of blood, and you were taken out. I stayed until the end." She held my hand and said, "If I don't make it, find a way to help the children grow up with love, even if I can't be with them." I kept that promise. "Ethan." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at her. His emotions mixed hurt, surprise, and then gratitude. He turned away, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Naomi replied softly. "Because I didn't want you to think I was here to replace her. I just wanted to do what Clara wanted." Ethan stood still for a long time. The midday light streaming through the window fell on his face, the emotion in his eyes clear. "You know," he said slowly, "maybe Clara saw something in you that I didn't." That afternoon, Ethan took Naomi to the lake where he and Clara had once planned to build a house. The water was calm, reflecting the pale golden light of the setting sun. He told her about the years since Clara's death, about the emptiness he believed would never be filled. Naomi listened, saying nothing, just letting the wind blow through her hair and letting him finish. When he was silent, she smiled softly. "You don't have to fill the gap, Ethan. Just learn to live with it." The simple sentence touched a deep corner of his heart. A few days later, a reporter covered a charity exhibition for the Walk Again Foundation, an organization Ethan founded to help disabled children. Naomi was invited to attend, along with Caleb and Maya. They walked into the brightly lit hall, and all eyes were on the two little ones, who were toddling on stage, holding hands. A large screen behind them showed a video of the therapy session, with Naomi by their side, patient and gentle. The reporter asked Ethan, "What inspired you to create this project?" He looked at Naomi and replied in a deep voice, "Someone who taught me that miracles don't come from medicine or money, but from faith and love. She helped me remember to believe in life." The entire room applauded. Naomi bowed her head, tears falling. She never thought she would be in the spotlight like this, after so many years of living in silence. Ethan stepped forward and gently took her hand. "Clara was right," he whispered. "You are the miracle she sent us." That night, when Naomi returned home, she walked into the girls' room. Caleb was asleep, and Maya was drawing something in her notebook. She looked up and pointed at the picture, 4 people holding hands in the sunlight, with the words "Our family" scrawled above it. Naomi hugged her, her heart filled with emotion. Out in the living room, Ethan was standing next to Clara's piano. He played a few notes, then stopped. Smiling, "I'm still clumsy, but can you teach me?" Naomi chuckled, sat down next to him, her hands on the keys, guiding each note. In the slow sound of the piano, 2 broken souls found a place of harmony. When the music stopped, Ethan looked at Naomi, his eyes warm and sincere. "Naomi, have you ever thought about staying here forever?" She was a little stunned, then replied softly, "I don't know what the future holds, but if the children need me, and if you need me, I will stay." Ethan nodded, a smile on his face. He understood that the promise was not just for the 2 children, but for himself as well, a man who had learned to walk again in his soul. That night, the sky was strewn with stars, reflecting on the sparkling lake. From the children's room came the sound of giggling, the soft sound of a piano harmonizing with the wind. Naomi stood by the window, gently closing the curtains, feeling strangely peaceful. She knew Clara would be smiling from afar, because the promise had finally been kept. Since the exhibition, life in the lakeside villa has not been as cold as before. The morning sunlight filtered through the glass windows, illuminating Caleb's little feet as they took their first steps on the wooden floor. While Maya sat giggling and cheering, Naomi stood nearby, her hand still outstretched in case he lost his balance. But Caleb took 3 steps, then 4. Ethan stopped in the doorway, his heart sinking. He no longer saw children in need of healing, but 2 fully alive souls. He walked over and picked up his son, his arms shaking with emotion. "You did it, Caleb." His voice was hoarse. The boy smiled, hugged his father's neck, and whispered, "Thanks to Naomi." That simple sentence made Ethan turn, meeting Naomi's eyes clear and warm. Something in him changed in that moment. Not simple gratitude, but faith, something he had lost in the pain of the past. That evening, they sat on the porch, the breeze blowing gently, the moonlight reflecting off the rippling lake. Ethan poured Naomi a glass of red wine, the candlelight reflecting on her face, gentle and calm. "Naomi," he said softly, "I never asked what made you believe the children would walk when dozens of doctors had given up." She was silent for a long moment, then answered, "Because I've seen miracles happen when people stop being afraid. Faith can open up things that science has yet to name." Ethan looked at her, a mixture of admiration and awe. He realized that perhaps it was he who needed Naomi to learn to walk, not the children. But as life began to stabilize, turmoil returned. One afternoon, Ethan received a letter from the company's board of directors. A group of shareholders wanted to replace him as CEO, citing his lack of focus after a family incident. Behind the letter was the urging of Mason Hale, a former rival whom Ethan had defeated in the business world. Ethan frowned, standing looking out the window at the city. He knew that if he lost his position, hundreds of employees would be affected. But now, he couldn't trade time with his children and Naomi for the pursuit of power. In the midst of their intense internal struggle, Naomi walked in, holding a cup of hot tea. "Are you worried?" she asked softly. He sighed. "I used to think I had control over everything, but now, I'm not sure what's really important." Naomi put down her cup of tea and said softly, "Sometimes the most important thing is the thing you're most afraid of losing." Ethan stayed up all night. He wrote a letter to his board of directors, rejecting the power struggle and announcing his resignation as CEO to focus on his charity, the Walk Again Foundation. The decision stunned the financial world, but Ethan felt relieved for the first time in years. He was living for what he believed in, not what others expected. The next morning, Naomi found him sitting by the lake, the sunlight shining on his tired face. She walked over and sat next to him, saying nothing. He turned to her and smiled. "I just lost my empire. Naomi." She looked straight into his eyes. "No, I just found my freedom." Those words made Ethan laugh, then fall silent for a long time. In the sunlight, the smile was no longer that of a powerful businessman, but that of a man reborn. But that peace didn't last long. One afternoon, while Naomi was picking up the kids from school, a strange man approached. "Ms. Naomi Rivera," he asked, his voice cold. "I'm a lawyer. There are allegations that you've been using unlicensed treatments on children." Naomi froze. Ethan got the news and rushed to the police station. The police said it was an anonymous tip-off. The media was quick to hype the story. Newspaper headlines read, "Magical Nanny," or fraudster photos of Naomi leading the children were edited and commented on widely. Ethan was furious, hired a lawyer and investigated the source. And then, a name appeared: Mason Hale. He was the one behind the smear campaign, trying to discredit Ethan by hitting the person he trusted the most. Ethan went to see Mason in his headquarters building. "You've gone too far," Ethan said coldly. Mason smirked. "You've taken everything from me. Ethan, now it's my turn." Ethan was silent, his eyes cold as steel. "There's one thing you haven't learned. Mason, power can't save you if you lose your humanity." Then he walked away. That night, Naomi was detained for investigation. The children cried out her name. Ethan sat in the car outside the police station until dawn. When Naomi emerged, tired but still holding her head, he approached and draped his coat over her shoulders. "I won't let them ruin this," he said firmly. Naomi nodded, her eyes wet but bright. The next day, Ethan held a press conference in front of dozens of reporters. He unveiled all of his children's medical records, scientific records, and testimonials from his primary doctor, who confirmed that all the treatments were safe and the results were real. He ended with a statement that silenced the room. Sometimes the miracle is simply that someone didn't give up on us. America seemed to wake up. Public opinion turned in Naomi's favor. Mason was investigated for defamation, and the Walk Again Foundation received thousands of new donations. That evening, Ethan returned home to find Naomi sitting on the porch, her eyes staring into the distance. He approached her and said softly, "The storm has passed." She nodded slightly, her smile tired but peaceful. "I never thought I would be this strong," she said. Ethan replied, "That's because you stood up not only for yourself, but for all of us." The wind blew, the yellow leaves fluttered, reflecting on the lake's surface. In that moment, they both understood that although challenges remained, together they had overcome their fears. And for the first time, Ethan felt the future was no longer something to fear. A year later, the lakeside villa is no longer a hiding place for old wounds, but has become a small center called Walk Again House, where dozens of disabled children are cared for and learn to walk, both with their feet and with their hearts. Ethan and Naomi stand by the window, watching the children learn to walk in the wildflower garden, where Caleb and Maya run around, laughter echoing in the wind. They have not only healed themselves, but also opened up opportunities for countless other souls. That morning, Ethan received a handwritten letter from a stranger. The handwriting was shaky. "Thank you, Sir and Miss Naomi. My daughter had an accident when she was 5 years old, and the doctor said she would never walk again. But after watching your video, I believed it. Yesterday, she took 3 steps. Thank you for making us believe in good things." Ethan finished reading and was silent for a long time. Naomi looked at him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" He nodded, smiling warmly. "You know, maybe this is the real reward." They walked out into the garden, where the morning sun was shining on the flower beds. Caleb ran over, holding an old camera. "Dad, I want to take a picture of Naomi." Ethan laughed. "What kind of picture are you going to take?" Caleb confidently replied. "I want to capture the magic." That innocent remark made both adults silent. Naomi bent down and touched the boy's shoulder, her voice choking with emotion. "The magic isn't in the picture, Caleb. It's in your heart." That afternoon, Ethan attended a conference in Washington where he was being honored for his contributions to the community. As he stepped up to the podium, he looked out at the hundreds of faces below, the once skeptical, the once laughing, now listening in silence. "I used to think power was about control," he began, "but after all, I understand real power is the ability to trust and love. My nanny, Naomi Rivera, taught me that. She made children who couldn't walk learn to stand up, and men who thought they were strong learn to walk again." The audience stood up and applauded, while Naomi, who was sitting in the back row, quietly wiped away tears. After the ceremony, Ethan found Naomi in the hallway. She looked at him and smiled. "You're embarrassing me," he replied. "I'm just telling the truth." They were silent for a moment. Then Ethan said slowly, "Naomi, I don't know what the future holds, but if you're okay with it, I want us to continue this together, not just in work, but in life." Naomi looked deep into his eyes, her lips trembling slightly. "Are you sure?" He nodded, his hand squeezing hers gently. "I've never been more sure." In the months since, the Walk Again Foundation has expanded to 3 more states. Several health organizations have joined forces to study the mental-emotional healing method Naomi has developed. The press has dubbed it the Rivera effect. But for her, it's still simple walking the kids in the morning, reading stories with Ethan before Caleb and Maya go to bed at night. Life doesn't need to be chaotic to be meaningful. One October evening, when the yellow leaves were falling all over the yard, Ethan sat in his study. On the table was Clara's diary, his late wife. He opened the last page, where it read, "If one day you're no longer by my side, remember, don't let your heart close, because love doesn't disappear, it just changes form." Ethan smiled slightly. He closed the notebook, walked out onto the porch where Naomi was sitting watching the moon with the children. He approached, putting a scarf around her shoulders. Naomi turned around, her eyes gentle. "Cold?" she asked. He replied softly, "No, just warm." Maya suddenly spoke, "Dad, Naomi told me that when someone believes in good things will come to them. Is that true?" Ethan bent down, looked at his daughter, his voice warm. "That's right, honey, because you and your brother are the best proof." That night, when the house was quiet, Naomi sat down and wrote in a small notebook. She wrote sometimes, "Miracles do not come from God's hands, but from a loving heart. And if one day, I forget why I started, just seeing the children's smiles I will remember." The story ends in the soft light of the next morning. Caleb and Maya run out into the garden, followed by Ethan and Naomi. The children call out, "Daddy, Naomi, look." They stand in the middle of the flower garden, spread their arms, and then jump, no longer baby steps, but a full-blown jump. Ethan holds his breath, then bursts into laughter, his eyes brimming with tears. Naomi looks at him and says softly, "See, magic never ends." A gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of flowers and the echoes of laughter. In the midst of that space, Clara seemed to be smiling somewhere, as gentle as the morning dew. And Ethan, for the first time in years, felt complete not because he had it all, but because he had learned to believe in the simplest of things. Love and kindness can keep people going, even when life has knocked them down. The Billionaire's Twins Couldn't Walk isn't just a story about healing, it's a reflection of how love can rebuild what power and science cannot. Ethan learned that control, wealth, and status mean nothing when your heart is closed. It was only when he let go, when he trusted, when he believed that life began to move again, both for his children and for himself. Naomi reminds us that compassion is a force stronger than fear. She stood by what she believed, even when the world turned against her. Through her, we see that faith isn't about miracles appearing from nowhere. It's about choosing to keep hope alive when everyone else gives up. For those in their later years, this story speaks softly but powerfully. It's never too late to heal, to forgive, or to start again. Sometimes, the miracle we wait for doesn't come from heaven. It comes from human kindness, steady hands, and hearts brave enough to love through doubt. Thank you so much for watching and feeling this story with us. If it touched your heart even a little, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that remind the world love still heals, hope still wins, and miracles still happen.